too high here, but don't misunderstand this. Well, thank you very much indeed for this more than kind introduction from both of you. And it's right what Jedoni said. We've been in close contact since David has been ambassador, and he's been a wonderful ambassador and even a more wonderful wife to Germany. And we appreciated the close cooperation, of course, very much so. And now I'm happy to be here. Even so, I'm just a substitute for my minister, because he was dedicated to come to the 30th anniversary of the Bilateral Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and he had to go to Parliament today to explain our new energy concept, which is fresh on paper. I'm very happy to be here, and I have to say this is such a wonderful building, and close opposite to James Joyce's house there, which I did not expect. And when I entered the street, I was really fascinated. And I'm fascinated by Ireland. I'm fascinated by Dublin. And I have the great privilege, because you mentioned my Sherpa function, having had a couple of times rather close contact to Bono as well as to Bob Geldof. And these are my best appointments in lifetime, if I may say so. And this really is something which makes my life even more wonderful. Well, speaking now about the issue you mentioned, I have a very good text here, but I wonder if I should stick to it. Maybe we do it in a more liberal manner. Where do we stand? It's difficult times not only for Ireland, it's difficult time for Europe, it's difficult time for Germany, and we had no expectation, in Germany at least, how much we would suffer from world financial crisis. And we were quite surprised about the involvement of German banks into these things, and that we certainly had to decide which banks are systemic and which are not. This is something which is not normally done by governments, and you know about the history. I have heard about you, where you all are connoisseurs, so to speak, and actually we feel the crisis started in America. The real market economy, so to speak, the capitalist country, as some say. And then we were quite surprised about the measures which were taken there, which were not really capitalist or everyday market economy. It also sometimes had a tendency of socialization of losses. So in any way, we all had to adapt to international programs which were underway. And so we also had to create something like an umbrella for our banking system, which was very costly, speaking about 100 billion. And then we had to spill over to the real economy, which was really hard to spill over. It's the same situation, more or less, than here in Ireland for us and for most of the countries in Europe. Then we had to show up with stimulus programs in volumes which we are not used to, speaking about another 100 billion, maybe even a little bit more. That's the situation we are all in, and the question is how to get out of this. So it's rather complicated. It's not my job to give any advice to Ireland, of course. I just come here to learn how you are dealing with that, and I appreciate very much the opportunities of important partners for discussion here. But of course, I had a look into the numbers which are were in the newspapers also. Today speak about a possible 50 billion bailout for banks here and things like that. I just want to say that it's our feeling in Germany that it's not just an Irish issue. It's more than that. It's a European issue. And it's also a matter of the euro, of course. And it's the financial markets which have to be observed very carefully. And we also need better international rules to deal with the financial markets and with certain instruments of the financial markets. This is our convictions, and this is the reason why we try very hard, and this includes Chancellor Merkel from the German side, that we want to use the G20 to discuss new international rules for financial markets. We started that very early indeed, and from our point of view, this was the sole reason to transfer the G8 more or less to the G20. The G20 were created, and we were very proud of that during a G8 meeting in Cologne in earlier days. But it was on the level, of course, as you know, of finance ministers and central bankers. There was no reason so far, at least as we see it, to move this up to the level of heads of state and government. But then we had this tremendous financial crisis, which was the biggest crisis since the early 30s. So something had to be done, and confidence should have been regained, which is not totally there again, but maybe we are on a good track. And this was a reason to do this job in the G20. And I think it's a little bit a lack of speed in this process, if I may say so. Well, the agenda, now we have the next G20 meeting to come in Korea. We had meetings before in Canada, in London, and Washington. And the first meeting in Washington was dedicated definitely to this agenda, how to handle the world financial markets in the future. Then we had the Financial Stability Board, and they came up with a list of measures which one had to elaborate on. I think it was 47 points, something like that. But, well, it's a little bit unsatisfactory, the status where we are so far. This is at least our feeling. Chancellor Merkel will certainly go to the Korean meeting with the aim to come forward in this regard. Well, you have mentioned that we seem to be a little bit better off at the moment than Ireland is, which fortunately is true, but we had terrible times. We had no imagination that we could ever suffer from negative growth rates, which we did in 2009. Well, we even had rather big negative growth rates. Not, well, there are some others who are still worse off, but our negative growth rate was in the area of -5% to the point 4.7, and this was quite by surprise. And it was even more difficult because we needed to implement then the stability programs in the area of more than 100 billion, what I said before. And the most complicated issue was to transport this information to the general public, because the citizens were not used about handling with billions here and there, and every second day there's a new fresh number. So this has been a rather uncomfortable situation in Germany. It seems like we are out of the tunnel more or less now, because we have to adapt our figures at the moment, fortunately in a positive way. We had a very good second quarter, 2.2% growth, which is the highest growth number since 20 years, since German reunification. And so we think this is going a little bit slower, maybe in fall, but in general terms, it looks like we're going to adapt our forecast from 1.4% actually to around 3%. The biggest value we have on paper from economic institutes, and even from the EU Commission, they say 3.4% will be the real number for this year. And well, this has been very difficult, as I said before, and now we feel it's absolutely necessary to have exit programs out of the stimuli, and exit programs, and this is most important, of utmost importance even, out of the debt situation. And well, we Germans sometimes, if we do something, we do it not by 100%, but by 120%, which is not always best. So we even wrote it into our constitution in order to avoid future situations comparable to the ones we are in. That we have to look at certain issues which avoid a debt situation like the one we are in now. And this is also the reason, speaking here about Europe, why we try to transport these messages to Europe. This is not dedicated to Ireland, it's dedicated to Europe as a whole. And we feel it is necessary to reform the Growth and Stability Pact. This is one thing. And I know this is something which, in the situation Ireland is in now, which might not even be very welcome, but I wish you will understand that this is something which is necessary to have a sound framework in some way. We don't speak necessarily about too much punishment of the cuff, which is mentioned now in some newspapers, but we need a little bit more observation of the development with regard to budget deficits, and at an earlier point also, as it is actually the case. On the other hand, we don't necessarily want to transfer much more power to the EU Commission, but the EU Commission, of course, will have a certain role. And we have also changed our mind a little bit, I will admit that, because there has been a discussion, do we need something like an economic governance in Europe? And this was not our point. It was our point in a negative way, because we didn't want to see that, because we felt something would have been in danger or might get into a danger zone, which is the independency of the European Central Bank. And this has been our key point all the time, that we have to keep the European Central Bank as an independent institution. So far, the primary concern of the ECB is to fight inflation. And so it's a little bit different from the system in the United States, where it's two aims at once, fighting inflation and also creating new jobs. And sometimes is a bargain also with political influence, and we want to avoid too much, or at least too much, maybe any influence from the political side on the ECB, though they can do their job independently. Nevertheless, we have understood that the markets are very strong at the moment, speaking about financial markets, and so if they see any weakness in our euro system, they go right in front and they try to make their deal with the situation. And this is something we have to find and to defend the euro from our point of view. So if we had a look at the Greek situation, I've just been by accident to Greece 2 weeks ago. They are pretty good now in elaborating their program, by the way. But this was the weakest point in the eurozone, and so the markets went into that. And so whatever we did, also in collaboration with Ireland, I have to say this, you contribute, as far as I remember, 1.5 billion to that. So this was necessary to be done. And normally those attacks from the market sides are over the weekend. So one needed a quick decision. And this was successful, more or less. And we created a new backing institution now, which should be able to avoid that other instances will follow in this regard. But nevertheless, I think it's necessary because we are Europe and because we are, of course, not totally on the same state of development, to bring our economic development closer together, to put it in the same direction. And in former days, we in Germany avoided to use the words to coordinate or even to to bring the economic policies closer. But this is now the point, I think, where we also need to look into this issue. And this is what's happening at the moment in the discussions of the so-called Van Rompuy task force, which is elaborating on the future of the Growth and Stability Pact, how we could adapt it to the new challenges. And we in the economics ministry in particular in Germany, but also in the entire government, have one extra point, because we feel it's not just budget deficits which are of concern, it's also structural developments which stay behind the budget deficits. So maybe we also should have a look into this. We in the economics ministry feel in particular that it would be necessary to use the Competitiveness Council of the European Union as the forum for discussion of that, not in a way that we decide you have to do this and that now, but more in an exchange of views and also well, best practices, what have you, and maybe to develop this in this way. Much has been said in the newspapers already, because Olli Rehn, the commissioner, has come up with a paper a couple of days ago about his ideas of reforms in the Growth and Stability Pact. And there's also a lot said about punishment, and if you fail to reach certain figures. I tell you the truth, maybe it's not welcome here in the room, that in general terms we agreed that we need some sanctions. But how far the sanctions should go, that's too early to be said, of course. But we need to discuss this, because maybe without sanctions it will be difficult to get certain countries to adapt their policies. And I have to admit, of course, there is one point of weakness in the system. So once a country, speaking in very abstract terms, because Germany has been in the same situation before, and if you are in neutral terms, if a country is in a difficult situation and you fail continuously not to reach the targets, let's say the 3% issue, now the 60% general debt issue is seems to become more important, then I think, it's a question if you are forced to pay an extra fee of sanction, then you might even get at this moment in a worse situation. So this is a problem one has to continue to discuss. But generally speaking, without any sanction, it's also difficult. So one has to follow this discussion in the weeks to come, and this will be one of the tasks of the Van Rompuy task force. Well, Jill, you mentioned about trade, to come to another issue, which is, of course, of great importance in this world we are in. Fortunately, and here we are more or less in a comparable situation, Ireland and Germany being heavily dependent on exports. As far as I see it, Ireland, 80% of your economic growth or development is on the export side. This is we don't have the same numbers, but it's also we are heavily involved in world markets, and so everything depends on the development of world markets. And this is the reason why we were in a bad situation, and one of the key reasons why Ireland at the moment is also in an uncomfortable situation, not speaking about the bubble in the real estate market. And so what we need, of course, is increasing numbers in world trade, and this seems to be the case. We had minus 11.5%. These are the IMF numbers the last year, but now we have an upswing, and it's around 9% plus at the moment. But the sources of growth are somewhere else. It's no longer in the United States being number one at the moment. And there's also another problem, of course, how the United States get out of their difficult situation. And we could very long speak about global imbalances, things like this, which seems to be necessary to be watched very carefully. It's now the emerging markets which drive the growth worldwide. And so what I want to say is when the world market climbs up again, we both have a benefit, Ireland and Germany. And I feel that Ireland is on a rather good track, even in a very good, difficult situation. The numbers are awful at the moment, if I watch them, if I may say so, if you allow me to say this. But I think if you continue in Ireland to stick to the program which is underway, to the austerity program in particular, and if you follow the demands that you reduce your budget deficits until 2014 down to 3%, it seems to me to be doable, then it's important to have sound fundamentals again, and this will be one of the key fundamentals, of course. And then I think confidence will come back. I see so many German companies here over the day, and they say, we feel committed to Ireland, and we will continue investing here, and we see a great future. It's just a difficult time now you have to pass through. But in the end, if you continue to do your program in the right way, I think you will be much better off than before. Well, this is my introduction.